Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online light novel review. This one's going to be for volume 16, which is called Alicization Exploding. And I think this arrived like nearly a week before it's actually meant to be out. I think it's out next week in like 4 or 5 days. But my copy actually arrived fairly early and I managed to read it. So let's get into talking about this. You can see from the cover here on screen that immediately it's super exciting because there's Asuna front and center on the cover. That really hasn't been the case for like the entirety of the Alicization arc. And it's a little bit misleading in that she only comes in right towards the end. But when she does arrive, it is a huge moment. It is a battle-turning moment and kind of changes the dynamic of the series. And it's a very meaningful arrival, her coming into things. So that definitely stands out. So as for, I suppose, my overall thoughts, I definitely really liked it. A lot of this is the battle that's taking place between the human army and the Dark Territory army, and I actually really like how they do it. They split the focus between a lot of different characters. They get across the idea that it is this big, this large-scale battle taking place of, here are the leaders, here's the kind of rank and file, and they just focus on like, here's Disintegrity Knight who's running the right flank. Here's Disintegrity Knight who's running the center flank, on the left, in the middle. And they give you a sense of like where everyone is, and they focus in on like on the enemy side of things, the different generals of the different races. So you get the goblin leaders, orc leaders, giant leaders, that sort of thing. And they're the main conflicts that we get here. So we get a lot of really quick, fast battles. And in that sense, the pacing works really well. They're not just lingering on a fight unnecessarily for the sake of things. They really focus in on just what's important at a different section of the battle. So you get like Dusselbert, starting off the battle because he's long distance, so he's just taking out the rank and file of the goblins with his conflagration bow, taking out like 50 at a time as they're running towards him. And they sort of tell the story with him of that because he's more so a ranged fighter, or at least his divine object is a ranged weapon. He needs the rank and file, man-at-arms guys to be kind of next to him. And so as the army sort of clashes, the people who are like defending him up close as he's using his bow are like dying beside him. So they kind of really get across like the tragedy of war kind of aspect of this. And in that sense, they really hit that home hard of just characters are dying. The scale of the battles are suddenly ratcheted way up, especially from the anime. You probably already noted just how violent Alicization is compared to like everything else, because as much as they're in a game, it is so realistic. It is basically that level of damage. So a whole army is getting wiped out. It gets across the tragedy of war completely. And so Dusselbert is dealing with the fact that the people defending him are going down, and you have him sort of take some hits going up against other different generals here and there, and eventually he runs out of arrows and has to go like use his broadsword. But they get across the idea that even if their divine object is not a sword as such, they're all still experts with swords and have their own weapons. You have Finatio, Synthesis 2, who is the sort of the leader of the central line of things, the center front line, and they do some really cool stuff with her at the start of the fight, where she's using her heaven piercing blade as like a sniper rifle at the very start. So she's like propped it up against her armor and is like pointing it at people really accurately, and she's trying to take out the kind of big tall kind of giant and orc generals and stuff like that. And it's really cool because they eventually get in really close, and they get across this idea that like what I think is actually really well done is that they constantly remind you of the fact that as much as most of what they're facing off against here in the Dark Territory are like goblins and like non-humans, they still are Fluchtlights, and they get across this idea that their souls are kind of pure, even if, you know, the way they portrayed themselves was sort of like evil on the bad side of things. And so they all have Fluchtlights, and in certain cases you have hints about some of these generals, some of these more intelligent, you know, non-humans, brushing on aspects of like nearly getting close to breaking the right eye seal, them being that upset about following Vecta's orders that he is so brutal in his orders and what he is asking him to do that even the enemy are suffering from the effects of like what's happening with the war, the amount of you know, allies that they're losing. And so you have those bits and pieces there of like you know, this orc general being so upset about what he was asked to do that he's like close to breaking orders by breaking his own seal on the right eye, with the idea that I suppose the only real law that they have in the Dark Territory is that you follow the strongest person, and so they can break the seal on their right eye by basically, I suppose, disobeying Vecta's orders, or Gabriel Miller. So there's a couple of situations where that comes up. They don't commit to any of it yet, but just the hint of the teases with a couple of those generals suffering from, you know, kind of Fluchtlight issues over the course of the battle. Similarly, with Finatio, you have her nearly take out the giant general, and he gets so lost in the fact that he was nearly killed that he freaks out for a second and comes towards her and is so aggressive that like his Fluchtlight is putting out this energy that stops her still. And you get these really nice little emotional moments with some of the other Integrity Knights as well, where you get one of her whirling blades come in and she steps in front of a big hammer blow and gets killed for Finatio, and they just give a really small backstory, but the idea that this was a whirling blade who actually loved Finatio, so that was a interesting thing for, like, you know, representation there. They even get across in like her earlier backstory as well that like she had broken the taboo indexes because she fell in love with another woman. So, you know, that was interesting, and that the emotion of that death of, you know, one of her, you know, subordinates basically dying for her gets Finatio back in the battle. Eldrie is leading one of the other armies up front, and it isn't going so well. They get across the in terms of the tactics of the battle, that the left flank of the Integrity Knights isn't doing so well, because at the front is Eldrie, and then the second line is led by Renry, who is one of the younger Integrity Knights. He's like 15 or so. So we kind of get the introduction to him and the idea that he's kind of a coward because he's so inexperienced. He had in the past lost the confidence of Administrator, but he was kind of brought out of deep freeze to come get involved in this battle. And they give him a nice little kind of arc about gaining that confidence, because he ends up hiding in the kind of back of the battle, which is where Ronye and Ties are looking after Kirito. And so when he sees them willing to sort of stand up for Kirito, and especially when he sees, you know, Kirito in the state that he's in, he sees the kind of the desire to help, even though Kirito's in this kind of coma situation. That's what snaps Renry out of it and gets him back into the battle. And so you have the kind of comeback against these sort of sneaky goblins in that side of the story, which I think worked really well, because you're getting introduced to all their different like divine weapons at this point in time, and he uses these two double kind of circular bladed weapons that he spins really fast, and they're thin and they slice through everything real quick. But then one of the goblin generals is able to block it, and he finally, like, his failure as an Integrity Knight was that he was never able to use any of the two extra forms of his weapon. He finally accomplishes that and takes out one of the goblin generals, which is a really cool moment. Eldrie's story here is more of the fact that he manages to survive, and he's there on the front leading, but his line is the one that is kind of struggling. He's the one who kind of gets broken through. And as much as he fights well, it's this constant sense of like, he's not as good as his mentor Alice. He wasn't able to do as much to protect her. He doesn't feel as strong as her or certain other people. You know, he was like the first Integrity Knight to be defeated. All of those kind of feelings of inadequacy come up, and they finish off his arc by he gets his opportunity to sort of sacrifice himself and protect her for like the first time properly. That's in response to the Dark Mages on the Dark Territory side of things doing this terrible spell where they sacrifice like most of the orc forces themselves to generate enough kind of magical energy to kill the Integrity Knights. So they kill off their own forces to create this kind of dreadful spell. Eldrie gets in front of that and goes, you know, full power with his Frostscale Whip and manages to divert all of the power of that, you know, devastating spell that would have wiped them all out into himself. And it's this incredible sacrifice that's the end of that character. And what I liked was that they kind of added some character to Alice through this, that because the focus of the Alicization arc has been, in a way, the awakening of her from just Integrity Knight under Administrator into Alice Synthesis 30, the person. She suddenly realizes the role Eldrie sort of played in her life, that, you know, he may not have been the most strong Integrity Knight, but he was the one who sort of, you know, kept her personality in check, who kept her from becoming just this kind of, just her skills, basically, who kept the fact that she could be, you know, have laughter and stuff like that. That was what he always gave to her, being around him. So I thought that was really well done through all of this, just setting up all those kind of different battles that happened along the way, and it was all really well done in terms of like, I didn't feel it was like needlessly sacrificing like big characters for the sake of those moments, but it was giving, I think, solid character arcs to everyone. You have Alice in the middle of this. Obviously the setup from the last volume is that before the battle even started, she had begun this massive sacred art, basically drawing all the energy possible towards herself. And this is something the enemy completely are unawares of. So they're wondering, basically, why can't we cast our long-range powerful magic? That's why they get so desperate that they sacrifice their own forces to create energy to use magic, is because Alice is drawing it all. They also get across the idea that energy is created because of the life and blood spilt in the battle. So Alice is effectively, you know, harnessing the energy from everyone who's dying here. And this is where she notes that the difference between the good forces and the bad forces in terms of their like soul energy is the exact same. So, you know, what is actually causing the Dark Territory to be so evil? But she creates this light spell, this light sacred art that is so powerful. And basically she explains that the way she's able to make something so powerful that it goes beyond, say, Chodelkin's big fire golem thing that was previously like the most powerful thing, is that even though she can't create like 20 sources across her body like he did, she instead uses some of the ingenuity she learned from Kirito, of like his battle with Finatio. He countered her using mirrors. That's how she can keep as many light elements alive as possible, is by using mirrors. So she creates this ball of mirrors where the mirrors are on the inside of the sphere and just generates light inside it. So it constantly reflects and just builds up and builds up inside the ball. And she eventually just drops it down on the enemy as this like nuclear bomb, and it wipes out like basically all of the goblins and the kind of first rank and file of the enemy. And it's this huge turning point in the battle that just like immediately takes out like close to half of the forces. It's really, really crazy. And it's getting across this idea of like the war is just getting super intense, that it started off pretty bad with just loads of people going down, dead, injured. But then it just gets to this stage where like they're both firing like nuclear stuff at each other, like what Alice does, then the kind of plague magic that they kind of use with sacrificing their own forces on the other side of things that Eldrie stops. Then they have to take out the dark, the mages, and so that's Alice using her Osmanthus blade to do that. And it's a really well done battle that I'm so excited to see the anime do, just to see how much like focus they give each section and so on. But yeah, just I really did like what they did, and just all the kind of newer characters of like Renly getting introduced and so on along the way. Even some of the character stuff on the dark territory side of things, of like the orc general kind of dealing with being asked to sacrifice like most of his men for the spell, and that he can't refuse, but he's so upset by the end of it that that's when the seal of the right eye like activates. Like it says like he felt his right eye pulse, and so on. So really interesting. Then we get introduced to like other characters as well. There's even another Integrity Knight who I was actually really interested by. Sheta the Silent, who is Sheta Synthesis 12, who's this, again, it's like Alice's age, like about 20. She's like this young, thin Integrity Knight who basically never speaks. And they come up against the Pugilists, who are basically the Dark Territory fighters who don't wear armor and don't use weapons. So the idea is that they can make their skin as hard as steel and punch as if they're using hammers and stuff like that. It's pretty crazy, the setup that they give them, that like Berkoli basically is like, yeah, it's actually easier to go into battle against these guys if you don't bring your armor, because they can just punch through your armor. But Sheta just steps up and is just like, actually, I'll deal with them. And it's an amazing reveal, because they completely set up the entire time. Swords pretty much can't cut them, because they're so focused on the dishonor of getting cut and the preference for fighting with their fists and feet and so on. And the setup for her weapon as well, she takes it out and it's like this really kind of super thin. Like they describe that like the width of her blade is like the width of like a baby's like pinky finger. And it's black, it's not a particularly long sword either, but she just begins to just chop people apart. And they set up that this is this obsession that she has, and it continues on from before she was an Integrity Knight, that when she won the sword tournament, she actually killed all of her opponents, and had this sort of tendency to always think about, being able to slice anything. So she has this desire basically constantly with her, and with her sword, I think it's the Black Lily sword, to just focus in battle on just slicing anything regardless of how hard it is. And then they do this very interesting thing when she comes across the leader of the pugilist, who she goes into one-on-one combat with. His name is Iskan, and they basically do this thing where like she's very much the kind of emotionalist character. She doesn't really present much, she doesn't speak much, so nothing really much comes across from her. Iskan is very kind of blatantly out there with what he wants to do, but they both end up really enjoying the battle, and they both end up sort of taking approaches where they borderline go easy on each other, and they more or less set up the idea that they're kind of both attracted to each other without really saying it. But they more take the approach of like, oh, you're a good opponent, we'll meet again one day, when they're like, it's borderline romantic the way it's going on here. So I thought that was actually a really fun, different dynamic to have for like two characters who are basically just like introduced right here. I actually thought it was just really well done. And I suppose it's at this point, like after all of this stuff is happening, they come up with this plan to, again, with the idea of getting to the world and altar, for Alice to draw the attention of Vecta because they hear from one like scout who kind of comes out and speaks as if like once Alice uses the crazy light spell that she's been storing up for like the entire battle, this soldier who barely survives the blast comes out and says, "You're the priestess of light. You're the one that we're trying to capture." So they realize all of a sudden that this whole battle is just to capture Alice, and that Alice can kind of use this to her advantage by drawing attention away from like their main force and like leading them elsewhere. And Vecta goes ahead with this because he the entire battle is very cool, calm, and collected. All these sort of failures and stuff not going correct, none of it really means much to him. He's just kind of like, okay, we'll chase after Alice, after the priestess of light, and he's the one who actually suggests sacrificing their forces to do that big spell earlier on, and this is obviously the setup for then the main forces of the Dark Territory, which is the Dark Knights and the Pugilist, and that's where that battle happens. And they create a separation in the battle to have a more kind of slower part of the story with the arrival of Asuna. So we obviously know she was entering using one of the kind of god accounts, basically, Stacia. So she arrives in, she slowly floats down, and as she's doing so, she uses basically the powers of a god and just opens up the land below the army. In front of the Pugilist, she creates this huge ravine in the land. And then she manages to save Ronnie and T.S. from Vasago, who was attacking them. So that was a weird interaction, actually. It's kind of like, wait, is he dead? Have they just killed off, him in all of this, the laughing coffin guy already? I don't really know, because she literally does just open up, the ground below him, and it's not really implied if he like fully died or not. So there's a few teases with that sort of stuff, but the basic idea is that she comes in and just immediately separates the armies with this kind of crazy display. They immediately put a limitation on it by kind of explaining that it requires so much, I suppose, opening up of her mind to use those abilities that she can only use it kind of rarely and to a certain degree. But yeah, the arrival of Asuna is great because it really is, a god arriving onto the battlefield. And obviously she meets Ronnie and T.S. first, and gets to see Kirito for a little bit. And when she comes out, that's when she meets Alice for the first time. And immediately the dynamic that they go for here is that they're both very, very at arms with each other. They are very antagonistic towards each other. Because Alice is protective of Kirito because she doesn't know who Asuna is. And then Asuna is protective of Kirito because suddenly Alice is being very like, he's mine type thing. So there's a kind of jealousy angle that they have going on. And it feels like, oh no, please don't do any sort of a love triangle thing. But I think he does enough consistently with the dialogue to get across the idea that Asuna states enough that, she loves him more than kind of anyone else. And I suppose just the significance of her arriving here is kind of more important than anything else. But she then obviously has to kind of catch everyone up with what's going on. And this involves just coming clean with everything and revealing that her and Kirito are not from this world, that this is this kind of simulation type thing, that they're real people from a soul perspective, but they're not actually real. And she has to explain that in detail to everyone. And basically get across the idea that this entire battle is for Alice. They want to, get you, and also on the good side, they want to get you as well. The main reveal, I think, to come out of all of this is that they eventually figure out that there is a mole within Wrath, because they suddenly realize that, based on something that Alice says, which is what Quinella said earlier on, that the seal of the right eye is an actual code put into the game. So that means someone making this game put something into it to purposefully stop the Fluctolights from developing into Alice Fluctolights. And that immediately kind of, obviously throws up red flags. That's the entire point of the project, is to create more people like Alice. So why put something that would stop anyone from doing it, when seemingly otherwise you would have multiple Alice AIs like this, rather than just, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Alice type thing. So what's going on there? And that's where they're kind of thinking, like, who is the mole? Was this the plan all along, to eventually like wait until one broke through this kind of code and then come in? Was it to create a time for Gabriel Miller to have enough time to go in and get them, or what? And they don't really tease much who it could be, but like you're just kind of thinking, like, is it Higa? Is it Kikuoka? Who is it? Like it's really kind of crazy to think about, like, or is it some other character we're not sure about just yet? But it's very, very interesting for sure. And like they throughout all of this, of course, you have the dynamic between Alice and Asuna come out, and what they really note about it is that Alice acts so differently around Asuna than she does around anyone else. Like, she's Integrity Knight Asuna around everyone. She's very polite, but she's suddenly really standoffish with Asuna. And they kind of do their best to kind of, get along and stuff like that. And eventually, once things calm down, they rest. During the night, this is when I suppose you get a really fun scene of Asuna kind of sneaks out to go see Kirito. And when she arrives, Alice is already there, and it's just like, yeah, I knew you'd come to see him. I'm here to see him as well. Then Ronye also is there, and then Sortiliana is also there, and they're all like, wait, let's all stop here and just say, like, what experience do we have with Kirito? Why do we all need to be here? So they all go through like explaining, like, oh, this is my experience with him. This is why I deserve to kind of be here, to hear about like every different stage of kind of Kirito's life, and so on. So it's this really fun thing where you obviously get Asuna leading out with, I was in this game with him for 2 years. We're going out for this amount of time. We live together. You have Alice kind of explaining where, like, actually I knew him for like a day, but I then looked after him for the last like 6 months. Then you have Ronye saying, like, he's been my page for this amount of time, and then Sortiliana saying, like, he was my page for this amount of time. So they're all like, okay, that all fits. We'll all kind of trade stories about him to get to know him better, because obviously Asuna isn't familiar with, I suppose, a lot of the stuff that Kirito has done in the underworld, and then they wouldn't be familiar with the stuff that, I suppose, who he was before the underworld. So there's this just interesting dynamic where they don't really go into many of the stories, but they get across the idea that, like, there's effectively this sort of like slumber party around this Kirito in a coma, where they all kind of trade stories about Kirito. And then when they wake up the next morning, there's the next attack coming in. So this is when they begin to set up the leader of the pugilist and his whole seals the right eye thing, in that Vecta is ordering them to cross the big chasm that Asuna made by just throwing ropes across. And then when obviously the good guys find out about it, it's really obvious what they need to do is to cut the ropes, and he's just watching on as, like, they've just done this like suicidal kind of thing that's just crazy. So it was I think really, really interestingly done for sure. Then the ending, I think the last couple of chapters are very, very interesting, where they get across the idea that over the course of, in the real world, basically, what Critter, who's the kind of tech guy working for Gabriel, has been doing, it's been slowly and surely bringing the acceleration rate down to 1-to-1 with the real world. So that means that the time passing in the real world is the exact same as the time passing in the game. And this is significant for a reason, of course. Then I suppose the big twist in all of this, because obviously things aren't going great for Vecta Gabriel Miller. most of his main forces are being wiped out, and it seems like the Integrity Knights have the advantage in what's going on here. So he needs to get, I suppose, more players like himself on his side of things. So he has Critter basically send out this beta test thing online, where it's like, here's this game we're previewing, help beta test the game, here's why you should play it. It's a realistic game where you can kill human characters, and there's a brief explanation of like most of the time in these type of games you can't do like, I suppose, gory violence against humans, but that is valid in the underworld. So they're going to draw hardcore MMORPG players in to do this beta test, to take on the accounts and basically act as Dark Knights in this battle. So he's tricking hardcore game players to join the side of the evil people by basically making it that it's just a beta test and that they're not actually doing anything that will affect anything. Yui finds out about this, which I think is an interesting thing right at the end of the book, and decides that to counter this, she needs to bring in sort of reinforcements on their side of things as well. So she immediately calls Sinon and Lifa, and then has everyone else basically meet up in ALO. So you get Egil, Klein, Lisbeth, Silica there as well, and the idea is that they're all going to jump in to the underworld as well to help. So great tease right at the end of the book of everyone's coming in. Asuna's just arrived in and made a difference. Now everyone's coming in. They set up this idea right at the end, like, what are we going to do? Asuna went in with like a god account, there's none of those left, so what, do we just go in as Dark Knights but like fight on the other side? And Yui says, no, what you have to do is use your already powerful accounts that are so close to those levels. Just convert your like ALO account to Underworld, and that's what we'll do, because they set up the idea that it's based on the same system. That's why Gabriel Miller's plan is going to work, is because it's all based on the seed. The seed has allowed this to happen. And I think that Yui's speech actually towards the end is really nice, because she's wondering like, oh, well, they might not be willing to do this because I might not emotionally, as a not real AI, be able to Yui is a top-down AI, and Alice is a like bottom-up AI, or I might have said that in reverse, but obviously Yui is a different type of AI. But she's wondering like, has she managed to get across the emotion of this effectively? And they're roughly getting across the idea that she is actually becoming, and I suppose gaining actual emotions, and that she begins to cry in all of this and talk about how the seed made all of this possible. Alice is like the end result of everything that's been happening here. People playing all these VMMORPGs, the system, I suppose, learning from real players, and that eventually leading down to, in the Underworld game, actual, I suppose, real, souls basically coming into existence, all thanks to all this happening. And they're all for this, of just like they'll repay the favor to Kirito no matter what. Everyone's going in, so that's going to be really incredible when everyone else arrives in, just to see the entire team hopefully fight together as well. Some other things in the, I suppose, reunion of Kirito and Asuna, the main thing to get across is that, like, it's not that Kirito immediately wakes up or anything like that, but he does have an emotional reaction to seeing Asuna. He says, like, the text says, like, that he's trying to say her name. He's aware it's her, but obviously can't actually speak or kind of move or say anything. So, and he does begin to cry as well. So he has this reaction, and it's almost like he's improving. The issue, of course, that he has to kind of get past is that, like they explained in the previous volume, he sort of blames himself for stuff like the death of Yu-Gi-Oh! And so on. So he's sort of attacking himself, like, emotionally, and that's what's restricting the progress. So he's going to have a big I suppose, character moment. I wonder what exact character or character combination is going to make that happen. What's going to be the spark that finally gets Kirito back up and running? Because, of course, we have to have Kirito get back up and use both swords again. And I suppose, especially this time, use Yu-Gi-Oh's sword as his second sword, and have the full meaning of that kind of come out. So I'm really, really, really excited for Volume 17. I think it's just 2 more volumes left of the main arc, and then like 19 and 20 are like almost like side stories or something like that happened in. I don't actually know what 19 and 20 are actually about, but I think I know for sure that Volume 17 and 18 together are the end of the main Alicization arc. So not too long to go, but everything is building up, everything's heating up at this point. So I thought this was an excellent book, for sure, definitely. So I definitely highly recommend anyone read this, and I think the Alicization arc is really, really building to a nice place. I do feel like ultimately the villains will need a little bit more kind of character stuff by the end, but we're getting there yet. I don't think Vecta hasn't really made his move yet, and Vizago will, I suppose, be back as well. So yeah, that's been my review for Sword Art Online Alicization Exploding, Volume 16. But in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.